and one night the walls whispered, followed by a blood-curdling scream that came from nowhere. Tom's heart stopped as Emma whispered, "Who's trapped in our walls?" It had been months since Tom and Emma had moved into their new apartment. The apartment was on sale for a very low price, which seemed too good to pass up. But what was a bargain to their bank account quickly turned into the most horrifying mistake of their lives. The place was perfect, spacious, affordable, and located in the heart of the city. The building had been recently renovated, and with fresh paint on the walls and sleek modern fixtures, it seemed like the ideal spot for the couple to settle into. But from the moment they stepped inside, it felt wrong, like the house itself was breathing. At first, it was small things, creaking floors that echoed at odd times, the faint sound of whispering from the hallway when no one was around. Then there were the shadows, darker, thicker, longer than they should have been, creeping in from every corner of their vision, never staying still. But they ignored them as if it could happen. Old buildings had their quirks. Yet, as days passed, the strange occurrences grew more persistent, more unnerving. It started one night when Tom woke up at 2 a.m. The room was dark and still, but something felt wrong. The air was heavier, thick with something suffocating, something watching. His eyes darted around the room, and for a brief second, he thought he saw something flicker in the corner of his vision like a shadow moving too quickly to catch. A shiver crawled up his spine, icy fingers gripping him. He brushed it off as the remnants of a dream, but as he lay back down, the silence felt thicker, heavier. Then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound like someone sobbing, muffled but desperate, coming from the walls themselves. He sat up, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, almost frantic, but still distant. It was a woman's voice, muffled as though someone was trapped inside the very structure of the apartment. And it wasn't just crying, it was the way the sound wove through the walls, like tendrils of anguish crawling through the bones of the building, clawing at his sanity. A chill ran down his spine. He turned to Emma, who was sound asleep beside him, oblivious to the noise. But the cries, they were real. They came from somewhere deep within the walls, from the very foundation of the place. The next morning, Tom tried to brush it off. He didn't want to scare Emma, so he kept the experience to himself. But the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the air shifted. The whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent, crawling into every corner of their minds. That night, the cries returned. But this time, they weren't just soft sobs. They were screams, frantic, desperate, the sound of someone in unspeakable torment pleading for help from beyond the walls. Emma, now awake, looked at Tom with wide eyes, her face pale as though she'd seen a ghost. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tom hesitated, nodding slowly. "I heard it last night, too," he admitted, his heart pounding like a war drum. It's coming from the walls." Emma's eyes widened in horror. "What do you think it is?" Tom swallowed hard, unable to answer. He didn't know, but something deep inside him whispered that it wasn't just the house settling. It was something far darker. As the days went on, the sounds only grew louder. It wasn't just crying anymore. It was screaming, as if someone was being torn apart, shredded by unseen hands, their soul trapped in agony. Tom and Emma both heard it, night after night. It was always at night when the world outside was quiet, and the darkness seemed to close in from all sides, pressing down on them. And yet, no matter how much they tried to shut it out, the sound was always there, hanging in the air like the weight of 1,000 nightmares. They tried everything. They called the landlord, who assured them it was probably just the building settling or maybe the pipes. But Emma knew better. She could feel it in the air, the presence, the thing that had been trapped in the walls long before they arrived, its ancient hunger festering in the shadows, growing stronger by the day. One evening, as Tom sat on the couch with his laptop, trying to distract himself from the growing dread. Emma could no longer stand it. Curiosity clawed at her like a beast, and she had to know the truth. "I'm going to check the walls," Emma announced, her voice shaking though she tried to hide it. Tom looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Are you sure? It's dangerous down there. I don't want you going alone." But Emma was determined. She wasn't afraid of what she couldn't see, at least that's what she told herself. She needed answers. She had to know what was causing the noise, even if it meant facing the unspeakable. In the basement, hidden behind layers of forgotten storage, Emma found it, the source of the noise. It was an old, rusted door, barely visible in the shadows, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. She could hear the screams now, louder, closer, a horrible mix of voices crying for release. Her heart hammered in her chest as she reached out, hand trembling, to touch the handle. The metal was ice cold, as if it had been frozen in place for years. Without thinking, she turned the handle. The door creaked open, releasing a thick, oppressive air, the scent of mold and death pouring out. Emma stepped inside, flashlight flickering, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. And that's when she saw it, the figure. A woman, twisted, rotting, her hair tangled and wild, her eyes empty black pits. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her skin stretched tight over bone. And though her body was decayed, her eyes, those eyes, were locked onto Emma, as though she was seeing into her very soul. Emma froze, rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The woman lifted a skeletal hand, pointing directly at her as if beckoning her forward. The sound of her breath, if it could even be called breathing, was short, jagged, like someone suffocating in slow motion. That's when Tom burst into the room. He grabbed Emma's arm, yanking her back, but when he looked towards the chair, the woman was gone. The room was empty again. The air felt lighter, but it was wrong, unnaturally still, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for something. Tom turned to Emma, his face twisted in confusion and fear. "What the hell was that?" I don't know," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "She was there. I saw her. I heard her." Tom looked around. The room had changed. The walls felt alive now, pulsing, whispering things that made his skin crawl. The air seemed thick with something ancient, something that didn't belong. They ran back upstairs, bolting the door behind them. But they couldn't escape it. The house was alive, breathing in their fear, feeding off it, trapping them. And that night, the screams returned, louder, more frantic than ever before. Now, it was more than just a voice. It was a presence. Something closing in on them from every side, creeping closer with each passing second. Tom and Emma tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. It was like the apartment had claimed them, its grip tightening like a vice, squeezing the last breath from their lungs. The woman in the chair was no ghost. She was a warning, a harbinger of the fate that awaited anyone who dared to live in that apartment. No one ever saw Tom and Emma again. Police searched through the building, tearing apart every room, searching every closet, every corner. But there was nothing, not a trace. The apartment was pristine, too pristine. Everything was in its place, as if untouched by human hands. Their clothes, their personal items, their belongings, everything was still there. Yet the apartment was so eerily clean. It was as if no one had ever lived there. But the whispers were growing louder, almost as if the walls were now waiting for someone else to enter, to take their place. It wasn't until weeks later that another couple moved into the apartment. They were charmed by the low price, just as Tom and Emma once were. The same feeling of unease gripped them as they entered, but they dismissed it. After all, it was just an old building, right? As the night settled in, the couple went to sleep, unaware of the fate that had befallen the previous tenants. And when the clock struck 2 a.m., the first scream echoed from the walls, chilling their bones. They tried to ignore it, but the cries grew louder, frantic, desperate. Finally, the whispers crept in, insistent. They heard it now. It was their turn. And in the corner of the room, the shadow of a figure flickered, just for a moment.